Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Carol sent me a story, so Steve, check this out, from Wisconsin. The town there has decided to outlaw cruising. Not in the big boats, but in the cars. So Wisconsin City approves new cruising ordinances with authority to impound vehicles of offenders. So from WFRV, officers with the Southern Wisconsin City announced the passing of the city's amendments to the anti-cruising ordinances, including granting police the authority to impound and tow offending vehicles. A release from the Janesville Police Department that was directed towards Janesville citizens and to those from around the region who come to Janesville to cruise the Strip announced the new changes to Janesville's anti-cruising ordinances. Officers say that the Janesville City Council voted to approve the amendments recently, and they've been proposed over the last few years but hadn't passed previously. The new amendments now reportedly include Milton Avenue and the Northeast Business Corridor. Additionally, the new ordinance grants police the authority to impound and tow unregistered vehicles as well as vehicles operated by reckless drivers. The fact that they can do something about that doesn't surprise me. It makes sense. But meanwhile, the question is why? Why do we do this? Well, the Janesville Police Department issued a response saying, now, some of you may be asking, why? They aren't hurting anyone. Well, officers spend a considerable amount of time responding to a range of complaints, including noise disturbances, disorderly conduct calls, fights, crashes, OWIs, underage drinking, vandalism, stabbings, and shootings, just to name a few. Moreover, this has been a long-standing nuisance for our residents and those visiting our city. So you should recognize that most of the things on that list are already illegal with or without cruising. The question is, does allowing people to drive around in the evenings, for instance, is that in fact something that, causes other problems? So here's the deal. I went and pulled the cruising ordinance because I was a young person once. And when I was a senior in high school in particular, I had a pretty cool car, 69 Dodge Charger, bright yellow, 383. And I spent a lot of time driving around on Woodward Avenue in the evenings, particularly on Friday and Saturday nights. And a bunch of friends and I would often meet at the same place, which was an ice cream place just north of 14 Mile on the west side of Woodward Avenue. And so we'd often show up. There's a parking lot there where you could legally park. We'd park there, go over to the ice cream place and get ice cream. We'd often stand around and eat our ice cream and catch up on what happened in the last week. And then quite often we'd pile in one guy's car and go do a loop on Woodward Avenue and then park that car, maybe get some more ice cream, or get in somebody else's car and do another loop. And the question I have, and I'm being honest here, did that hurt anybody? Because I do know there were times where there was so much cruising traffic that the city shut down the streetlights because they thought, well, we shut down the streetlights, it'll be darker out there and people will cruise less. And it did cut back a little bit on cruising out there. But really, is this really the crime of the century? So I pulled the anti-cruising ordinance. It is Article 12, Section 38-304, Findings and Purpose. The City Council hereby finds that a threat to the public health, safety, and welfare arises from the congestion created by the repetitive and unnecessary driving of motor vehicles. Well, it might be repetitive, but is it unnecessary? Also known as cruising at certain times upon certain highways within the city of Janesville. They actually list nine things that this will do. It'll reduce dangerous traffic congestion. It'll facilitate safer streets. It'll facilitate the movement of vehicular traffic upon certain streets throughout the city. It'll reduce noise pollution and disturbance. It'll reduce air pollution. It'll reduce the obstruction of streets, sidewalks, and parking lots. Hey, if people are cruising on the sidewalks, give them a ticket. It'll reduce the impediments and interferences with the use of public and private property resulting from cruising. Interference with private property, It'll facilitate and ensure safer, easier, and more ready access for emergency vehicles. Okay. Now, here are the terms and words and phrases which you should always look at when you see a statute. See if it has its own definitions, because this one does. Cruising means driving a motor vehicle past a traffic control point in the designated area more than twice in any 2-hour period between the hours of 7 p.m. and 5 a.m. Passing a designated control point a third time under the aforesaid conditions shall constitute unnecessary repetitive driving and cruising. And by the way, I've been out looking for an address and driven by the same place 3 times just because I couldn't find it. But that's their definition. And the designated areas, they mention a bunch of streets, Milwaukee Street and Court Street and so on. And then it says traffic control point means a reference point within or adjacent to a designated area selected by a police officer for the purpose of determining unnecessary repetitive driving and cruising. So they're going to literally count how many times you go by a certain spot within a certain time frame. Okay? Cruising is prohibited. It shall be unlawful for any person to engage in cruising. For the purposes of this article, the person having control and or ownership of a motor vehicle shall be considered the person cruising without regards to whether that person was actually driving. So they're saying is, if you got your car and you're driving and you realize you've gone past a control point twice, you can't just switch drivers, because that would be cruising. Having control or ownership of a motor vehicle shall mean either the owner of the vehicle, if present in the vehicle, or if the owner is not present, the person operating the vehicle at the time of the violation. Exemptions. It does not apply to a publicly owned vehicle. So the cops can cruise all they want. Doesn't apply to authorized emergency vehicles. Doesn't apply to taxi cabs, public transit buses, or other vehicles. And it doesn't apply to events, uses, and activities sponsored, permitted, or authorized by the Janesville City Council. And then here's where we get to the violations. Any person who violates any provision of this article shall, upon conviction, be subject to and shall pay the following applicable forfeiture, to which shall be added the cost of prosecution, not less than $100 nor more than $250 if the person has not committed a previous offense, not less than $200 or more than $500 if the person has committed one or more, and in default of the payment of a forfeiture imposed for violation of any provision of the article, such defaulting convicted violator shall be confined in the jail until such forfeiture and costs are paid, but not to exceed 60 days, or the court may suspend such defaulting violators' Wisconsin motor vehicle operator's privileges in the manner and for the time provided by law. So that's what it says, and they've outlawed cruising on certain streets. And, it's one of those things. And I know I'm going to get somebody, either from Janesville or from another place that has a problem with cruising. And they're going to say, it's crazy. These kids just go out and they drive around, and all they're doing is driving around and driving around. I've been stuck in rush hour traffic and thought to myself, what are these people doing out here? Shouldn't there be a law? And I know some people are going to say, Steve, if you lived near this area, it would drive you crazy. Well, I don't know these particular streets, but I can tell you that the streets we cruised on when I was in high school, we're talking about Woodward Avenue. That's the street I cruised on. Now, other people in Detroit cruised on Telegraph. Other people cruised on Gratiot. There's always a big, competition where the cooler cars were. And those are commercial areas, commercial districts. So where we were cruising, there were stores. There were stores, restaurants, bars, things of that nature. But there were not residences up and down that road. Now, if you go in a block, there's residences. And if those people wanted to go someplace, I guess if they came out to Woodward and had to go someplace, they'd see people cruising. But it was never bumper to bumper or anything like that out there, even on the warmest nights with the most people out there in the perfect weather. That didn't happen. And so I'll be curious to see if this actually results in anything, because the 2 times within that time frame, it's going to require somebody to literally sit there with a notepad and probably a video camera and writing down cars as they pass by. And it'll probably result in the most obnoxious looking cars getting pulled over. The ones that are obvious or ones that are obnoxiously loud, which by the way should be ticketed anyways for noise. But, so would a police officer spot my bright yellow car with a black stripe? Probably. But if somebody's out there in a silver family sedan, they probably won't get spotted as easily. But I'll be curious to see how this gets enforced. But I think it's sad, because I know some people would often talk about the cruising problem out on Woodward Avenue back in the day. And like I said, they never did anything about it as far as I know, except there'd be a police presence out there. And then later on, like I said, they shut off the overhead lights. But I don't know if people understand, if there's a perfectly sober person driving in a car up and down the road Who are they hurting and how? And I know you're going to say, but Steve, what about the dangerous traffic congestion and the air pollution? Well, it happens anytime anybody drives anywhere. And if I can't cruise on this street, I'll go cruise someplace else. And unless you're willing to say we're going to pass a law that says you can only drive so much on any given day or something. So I for one, am not in favor of this law. And I'm being honest, and the reason I'm not in favor of it is because of the fact that I did this as a young person, and I don't think I hurt anybody. I never once got a ticket while out cruising. Never. We weren't out there breaking the law. The primary thing we were doing out there was talking about cars and driving our cars and enjoying our cars. Now, the weird thing is that today, I know a lot of young people who not only don't have cars, but don't have driver's licenses. So I'm not sure if it's as big as it used to be, but maybe in Janesville it is. I don't know. But that's the story. By the way, I didn't notice in the statute where they have the right to impound the car, but I'll assume it's there for the purposes of this story. But again, they've simply outlawed cruising by passing a anti-cruising ordinance in Janesville. And they have the authority to fine you, jail you, and possibly even impound your vehicle. Carol, thanks for sending that from WFRV. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Is it better to have something that you don't need than to need something you don't have?